What would it mean if the United States moved from talking about Greenland to actively trying to take it? A territory with just 56,000 people, sitting atop some of the world's most strategic shipping lanes and rare earth deposits, has suddenly become the center of a geopolitical standoff involving NATO allies, Arctic security, and great power competition. This video unpacks what is really happening behind closed doors in Washington, Copenhagen, and Nuuk, and why this moment could quietly reshape the global balance of power. If this situation escalates, the consequences extend far beyond Greenland. It could fracture NATO unity, redraw Arctic security norms, and signal a new era where territorial pressure replaces post-war restraint among Western allies. If it fails, it may expose the limits of American leverage even under renewed great power rivalry. And if it succeeds through negotiation, it could set a precedent that alters how sovereignty, autonomy, and security guarantees are understood in the 21st century. To understand why Greenland matters now, you need to start with geography. Greenland is the world's largest island, covering over 2.1 million square kilometers, larger than Mexico, yet it sits between North America and Europe like a strategic hinge. Roughly 80% of it is covered by ice, but beneath that ice lie significant deposits of rare earth elements, uranium, and other critical minerals essential for advanced electronics, defense systems, and renewable energy technologies. As climate change accelerates Arctic ice melt, Greenland is also becoming central to future shipping routes that could cut travel times between Asia, Europe, and North America by thousands of miles. Greenland is a semi-autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. Denmark handles defense and foreign policy, while Greenland governs its internal affairs. It is also home to a long-standing US military presence. The United States has operated Thule Air Base, now known as Pituffik Space Base, since the early Cold War. That base plays a crucial role in missile warning systems and space surveillance, tying Greenland directly into American strategic defense. What has changed is the broader global environment. The Arctic is no longer a frozen backwater. Russia has expanded its Arctic military infrastructure dramatically, reopening Soviet-era bases and deploying air defense systems along its northern coast. China, though not an Arctic nation, has declared itself a near-Arctic state and invested heavily in polar research, infrastructure projects, and mining interests across the region. For Washington, Greenland increasingly looks less like a distant allies' territory and more like a strategic asset at risk. This is the context in which US Vice President J.D. Vance is now stepping in. Denmark's foreign minister confirmed that Vance will host a high-level meeting at the White House with Danish and Greenlandic officials, alongside Secretary of State Marco Rubio. That detail matters. Hosting rather than attending signals initiative, leverage, and priority. It also elevates the issue beyond routine diplomacy. The Trump administration has revived and sharpened an idea first floated during Trump's earlier presidency: acquiring Greenland. Trump has repeatedly argued that US control over the island is necessary to prevent Russia or China from gaining influence there. In recent remarks, he framed the outcome as inevitable, suggesting that diplomacy would be preferred but not required. That framing has unsettled Denmark, a NATO ally that has fought alongside the United States in multiple conflicts and hosts American forces on its soil. Denmark's response has been careful but firm. Officials have emphasized that Greenland is not for sale, while Greenlandic leaders have reiterated their desire for greater autonomy, not a change of sovereignty. Greenland's population is predominantly Inuit, with a political culture shaped by decolonization, resource control, and gradual self-determination. Any attempt to bypass Greenlandic consent would inflame domestic politics on the island and undermine the legitimacy of any agreement. What makes this moment especially sensitive is timing. a bipartisan US congressional delegation is heading to Copenhagen to signal alliance unity even as pressure builds behind the scenes. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen is meeting with leaders from Greenland and the Faroe Islands to reinforce internal cohesion across the Danish realm. These parallel tracks suggest quiet concern that the issue could spiral if not tightly managed. Now consider the first what-if scenario. What if the United States escalates beyond diplomatic pressure? Even the suggestion of military options, however unlikely their execution, changes the strategic atmosphere. NATO is built on the principle that force is used collectively against external threats, not internally among allies. Any hint that the US might coerce a fellow NATO member would weaken alliance credibility and hand rhetorical ammunition to rivals like Russia, which regularly argues that Western rules apply only when convenient. A second scenario runs in the opposite direction. What if this pressure results in a negotiated expansion of US privileges rather than sovereignty? That could mean long-term basing agreements, exclusive access to mineral development, or expanded missile defense infrastructure. Such an outcome would allow Washington to secure its strategic objectives without formally altering borders. It would also allow Denmark and Greenland to preserve legal sovereignty while accommodating security realities. But even this outcome carries risks, especially for Greenlandic politics, where concerns about environmental damage and external exploitation run deep. The ripple effects extend well beyond the Arctic. In South Asia, where borders and sovereignty remain highly sensitive, any perceived normalization of territorial acquisition under pressure could reinforce hardline positions. In the Middle East, where US credibility as a stabilizing force is already contested, allies would watch closely to see whether Washington respects the sovereignty of its own partners. Globally, the episode feeds into a larger question. Are great powers returning to spheres of influence and transactional geography? Economically, Greenland's mineral potential intersects directly with global supply chain anxieties. China currently dominates rare earth processing, controlling roughly 60% of global supply and even higher shares of refining capacity. Western governments have identified diversification as a strategic priority. Greenland offers one of the few politically stable alternatives. But stability depends on trust, consent, and predictable governance. Heavy-handed tactics could delay development rather than accelerate it. There is also a legal dimension. International law, including the UN Charter, places strong emphasis on territorial integrity and self-determination. While peaceful transfer of territory is legal if freely agreed, pressure or coercion would raise serious legal and diplomatic challenges. That matters not just for Denmark, but for every small or medium-sized state watching how power is exercised. As the White House meeting approaches, much will happen out of public view. Language will be carefully chosen. Signals will be sent without being acknowledged. The real question is not whether Greenland changes hands, but whether this episode marks a broader shift in how power is applied among allies in an era of strategic anxiety. History shows that moments like this rarely announce themselves as turning points.